Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, and welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Anne. I'm here today with Dr. Uejin Kim. Hi, Eugene.
Hello. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so Dr. Kim is a child psychiatrist in the Texas area, and she's also the host of the Good News Mental Health Podcast. She is also a Jesus lover, just like me. And so we have been talking this morning already for her podcast. We're doing a little episode exchange. So I want to make sure that you guys hop on over to the Good News Mental Health Podcast when you're done listening to the Soul Grit Podcast today, and you'll get to hear a little bit more of our conversation. And the reason that we hooked up and started recording was because we both have the same passion that people need healing that includes both their spiritual life, their faith in God, as well as the practical kind of parts that we learn through science, the therapy, the medications, the counseling, all of that. And so I'm excited to have our conversation here today.
I'm so excited too.
Yes. So, Eugene, Dr. Kim, do you care which one I call you?
No.
Okay. Like I said, we've already been talking a little bit this morning about church hurt and forgiveness. And so we'll point people to that episode when it's released. But tell us just a little bit more about your upbringing and how you got into this profession.
Absolutely. So, I'm a Korean American immigrant. I came here when I was 10, and having the immigrant background, maybe incomplete church, background for my parents' kind of spiritual journey, all came to a head. And also me being like a perfectionist and planner, and none of my family members are. So there was a lot of like, what is going on? Kind of a child like, you know, a child who loves certainty entering into constant uncertainty, if you
Mhm.
kind of know what I'm talking about, right? So, um, and just kind of like a background story of spiritual journey, because that's just like the pivotal core of our beings, right?
Mhm.
I just never felt like good enough. There was always that next, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, like, B plus A, there's always something else to accomplish. And because I was so praised for my accomplishments and sense of control and plan, I think it's just like grew me into this monster of always seeking attention in that way of getting control, getting achievements, and getting it done. And mix that into quasi-religious idea that God is proud of you if you are not mad, not sad, always happy, leading people to, you know, saving X amount of people, like things. It kind of became like a quadrupled monster in my mind and in my spirit. But it just really led me to spiritual burnout really early. I was just like, I kind of told God, I was like, if this is your people, then I don't want anything to do with it. This is not a sustainable, life for me. Had my prodigal daughter moments. But it really, Holy Spirit drew me back when I was at my rock bottom. And that ironically used people who were not so graceful to show me grace in that moment. And I think God does that, where he uses people who hurt you in the past to show you grace, and aspects of himself. And he really did that beautifully. And I was just sold. I was like, yep, like that makes sense now, and my dad is a physician, so I always wanted to not be a physician, like anything but a physician, because he had this like vision how I would be carrying on his practice or whatever. So I was just like always like, nope, So I it's just like I just tried every other thing like social worker, I don't even know what else I thought, like teacher or something. But it's just kind of interesting because when there's a fork in the road, sometimes like when you're running away from it, but in that moment, it just makes sense to do that thing, So then God is like, don't you think this? And I was like, yeah, you're right. So then it was kind of like, hopping the train, the next
Yeah.
train, next train. And God led me to medical school. And during the third year of medical school, so first 2 years kind of book learning, you're learning about all the systems. And third year usually is like a rotation where you kind of do the buffet line, all the
Mhm.
specialties. And that was a really hard year for me because I had a lot of health issues going on and like my car broke down and I needed to
Mhm.
get a ride from everybody. So logistically, it was very chaotic. And every rotation I hated because I had to come home and deal with insurance, car insurance, and, stuff like
Uh,
that.
yeah.
So I just hated all the rotations. So at the end, you have to choose it. But then I was like, God, like I hated all the rotations. I don't even know what to pick. You have to pick something. And if as I was reflecting on that year, I remember in my free time, like when I have no patients to see or something like that, I always gravitated towards psych patients,
Mm.
whether it was schizoaffective or a cross-dresser in a cancer clinic. So I just like went back to them, just like ask questions, and a big aha moment for me was I hated surgery. That was like the worst rotation. But there was a schizoaffective patient who kept on pulling out his NG tube out, because he was like
Mhm.
paranoid and just like
Mhm.
he just wanted everything out. He wanted to leave, but he trusted me. So after rotation, I'm like dying to go home and just leave, but I would always go back and put his NG tube back in, and then
Mhm.
to me was like logically, I was like, I hate this rotation, but if I'm going back, to help
Mhm.
them before going home,
Mhm.
maybe it's a calling,
Yeah.
like everybody else hated him because he's inconvenienced. But if you're going back during your worst rotation, maybe it's a calling. So
Mhm.
that really became like, oh yeah. So never look back. I don't know if I would do medicine if it wasn't for psychiatry,
Yeah.
but I mean, I can't imagine doing anything else right now.
Wow.
So that's where I am here today.
You know what? It would be really cool for that schizoaffective patient to know that you were he was part of
Oh
you
my God,
finding your
that would
calling.
that would make me so emotional and happy. That would be so
Yeah.
cool.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you just really quick for our audience tell us what schizoaffective is?
Oh, absolutely. So schizoaffective. So in the world of psychiatry and therapy too, we have this quote unquote the Bible called DSM-5, right? And then there's a categories of mental disorders that we try to quantify and criteriarize mental health disorders. And schizoaffective is under the thought processing disorder. So schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and schizophrenic. So it's where you have delusions or hallucinations where you're seeing things or hearing things and believing things that are not how other people perceive it. So this particular patient had schizoaffective disorder, which mixes schizophrenia and also some of the mood disorder component.
Mhm.
So he definitely had delusions of paranoia, but also had a lot of mood swings that mimicked
Mhm.
manic symptoms. So that's the definition of schizoaffective.
Yeah, I can remember this because I don't deal with like really severely
Yeah,
mental ill in my
mentally, uh-huh.
practice.
Yeah.
But I can remember from having to test like what's the difference between schizophrenic, schizoaffective, schizoid, like they all have
Yes,
the
yes.
same like first four letters or something, and so you have
Yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I don't deal with the severely mental ill anymore either in my private practice, but one thing I just like this is how far I was from psychiatry and mental health because I think I almost failed my flagship test on psychiatry. And I hated studying for it because mental health, they put words to describe like a common sense phenomenon,
Right.
So it's um like cognitive distortions and defense mechanisms were my least favorite. I'm like
Mhm.
reframing, of course you would reframe, like
Mhm.
so I just did not do well in the mental health test during my medical school year. Yeah,
Well, tell us right now, like, what are you doing? What's your practice like now?
absolutely. Um So after I graduated from child psychiatry fellowship, I entered into that was during COVID, right? So telepsychiatry was, up and coming, and you can find quote unquote work-life balance. And I was in the corporate kind of company for telepsych. And I was serving a state of Virginia in a very federally funded, sick kids, right? But how it was set out was they didn't deliver what they promised, which was they will respect your quality of care that you want to give to patients, because the payees are the clinics, right?
Mhm.
And clinics are like, why are we paying the doctor if there's a lot of no-shows and patients aren't showing up? So they were kind of like, well, legally, 14-year-old can show up by himself, like they were just trying to make, and I can understand they're trying to make bang for buck that they're paying the
Mhm.
company to be seen. But then for me, I was like, it's really hard for me to do assessment and give medications on 14-year-old always saying, I don't know. I don't
Right.
know. I don't
Without
know.
the parent
So
there. Yeah.
yeah. And the parents were, and the my medical director at the time was like justifying it like, well, parents work 3 jobs and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I understand that. And that's what I serve to in my fellowship. But I'm asking is like initial appointment,
Yeah.
like um so when I had to fight for quality of care, that was kind of really jarring for me.
Mhm.
And I really have to thank my training at UT San Antonio, because we understood serving the poor and
Mhm.
neglected, but at the same time, there's a balance of not bending over backwards and keeping the
Right.
quality of care, and how do you do it so well?
Mhm.
So little shout out to UT San Antonio for teaching me that. So then I kind of had to leave. And at the same time, I was kind of going through my trauma healing journey too. And
Mhm.
faith was such a big part of that.
Yeah.
God really challenged me like, hey, if I'm like the author of your healing journey and you're not sharing that with the audience or your patients, like, aren't you holding back, from them? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. But, and like in training, nobody taught us how to incorporate faith
Yeah.
and mental health healing journey. So I was like, so afraid. I was like, oh my gosh, all my attendings are gonna judge me, like I'm entering this like don't go there
Right.
zone, and I really wanted to do this respectfully to both realms of beliefs. And I really struggled with it, but I felt like private practice was the only avenue where I can really explore this well. So that led to kind of taking the leap of faith of doing private practice, and really marketing the way that God was kind of putting on my heart, what to do, what not to do. So right now I have a private practice, and I'm keeping it small because I do want to be a good mom and a good wife, and in my capacity, and I can't heal everybody, but I also want to be present for my family, so that balance. So, which meant that I can't handle a lot of severely ill patients because they do require higher levels of care. Um, but I do miss them.
Mm.
But I really like the balance and the freedom that I have to
Mm.
really explore, be spiritually present with my patients. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that they're Christians, and people don't seek me specifically because I'm Christian, even
Mhm.
though I do say it, but they're saying you're spiritually present,
Mm.
and you make my spiritual being present in the room too, because
Mm.
I'm seeing their inner child, and I'll be like, how did you feel that happened? And I'm kind of asking them questions. So
Yep.
I really like where I'm at right now, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. So do you see patients online or do you have an office somewhere?
I do both now.
Yeah.
So whatever patient's convenience, of course, if they live like out of my city, is gonna be hard. So
Mhm.
telepsych, a lot of times I see my kiddos like in the parking lot with their parents so that they don't have to miss like, full day of school,
Oh, yeah.
so there's a lot of flexibility with telepsych, which I love, but some people just really prefer that in person.
Yeah.
So I have that available for them too.
That's great. So one of the things that I think our audience might benefit from is just it's going to seem basic to you, I know, but like
Yeah.
let's talk about like a little bit of the difference between what a psychiatrist does and what a psychologist does. And I know for some of our listeners, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, why are we talking about this? But for a lot of people, they'll call me up and they'll say, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I don't know what they do. So let's just talk about that to clarify that for people.
Yeah, and absolutely. Sometimes, like, when I like therapist licenses is kind of confusing for me too, because there's like
Okay.
LMFT, LPC. I'm like, what is this alphabet soup? So it's like
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like honest, like with my therapist friend, I'm like, I don't even know what you do. Can you just like kind of teach me
Okay.
what your forte is?
I'll
So
teach you, Dr. Kim.
absolutely. I'm always willing to learn. But yeah, like mental health world professionals it can be kind of very difficult and confusing to navigate. So, I did talk about, so I'm a psychiatrist. So I talked about me going to medical school. So psychiatrists are people who went to medical school. So they have MD and DO next to their name. And we study the body kind of as a whole. So we know kidney, liver, heart, but probably not like as deep as other specialties. But then when we get more specific in our trainings, the further that we go, we really studied, how does cancer medicine affect your mood? Or like if you had a stroke, there's depression after stroke. So it's like that mind body connection, we really honed it down and we saw a lot of cases to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and because we have MD and DO next to our name, we can prescribe medicine,
Mhm.
if they're able to be treated with a medication, if it can kind of alleviate some of the stuff. So for schizophrenia or schizoaffective, for example, we can prescribe, antipsychotics, or for manic mood stabilizer. So we are trained to specifically be able to prescribe and know when and what to prescribe when we
Mhm.
see mental health disorders. Um, so that being said, we are psychiatrists, MD and DO. Now, under the medication treatment option, there's now mid-levels like PAs and NPs
Mhm.
who got their training in physician assistant or nurse practitioner, and they get specific psych trainings. So if you look at the number of years, is less, but it's to kind of meet the public health needs
Yeah.
of mental health, medications when psychiatrists are not available. And on the other side, there's a psychologist that
Mhm.
has PhD, which is after college, they get 6 year, maybe 5 to 6 years of PhD level. They study psychology. And um, what they, from my experience of interacting with psychologists, what they're so good at is kind of taking the statistics and research of mental health issues, so that you can kind of find more data in that. Um, and I'll let you kind of explain the therapist kind of group.
Mhm.
And that being said, can a psychiatrist do therapy? Yes. But can a psychologist prescribe medications? No. So there's in holistic care, when people say, like, I don't know if I should start with therapy or start with medications, that's like a big
Mhm.
question that I get asked too. And usually how I say it is, if your symptoms are so severe that you can't hold your thoughts and study it,
Mm.
like your mood swings or anxiety or panic attack is so frequent and so severe that you can't sit still and like talk to a therapist and be in that maybe very uncomfortable place, right? Then I say usually start with the medications, because what medications are supposed to do is alleviate some of the severity and frequency of panic attacks or depressed mood or anxiety so that you can do therapy.
Mhm.
Um, but if you're like, you know what, I can have a conversation, I can be in an uncomfortable space, I usually recommend, start with therapists first and then see what happens, because it saves you money, and if you're like, I'd rather not take medications if I don't have to, then that's a good avenue to start with.
Yeah. That's what I'll tell a lot of people too, is like we can try therapy for a while because it's not invasive. You're not putting any other foreign chemicals into your body. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have a lot of hesitation about taking pharmaceuticals. And so
Mm-hmm.
great, let's start with therapy. But if we're not getting traction in therapy, like we're
Yeah.
doing the same thing every week and it's not making a difference, like
Right.
that may mean that you need a little bit more of that biological support, which
Mm-hmm.
is what a medication can give you, so that you are able to do in therapy the things that are going to make the change.
Yeah,
And so that's
absolutely.
when I would refer to a psychiatrist. So I don't know
Yep.
if you notice this, but a lot of people, this might just be like managed healthcare problem, something like that, but a lot of people will start with their primary doctors when, let's say, it's like depression, anxiety, ADHD, something like that. When do you think somebody needs to be referred to a specialist like you, a psychiatrist, versus being able to just talk to their primary doctor?
Yeah. I think there's definitely an aspect of public health issues
Mhm.
when PCPs are, primary care providers are prescribing psych meds. And usually, if you've tried maybe 2 to 3 medications,
Mhm.
um, it's a pretty giveaway. Like, hey, I think you need higher level of care because with psych medications, there's kind of like algorithmic, like prescribing things like, okay, you do that, you go up and then blah, 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 try again. After that, it really becomes an art form
Yeah.
of prescribing medications and also art form of diagnosis. Like, I think you will know what I mean. Like, a
Mhm.
lot of people are like, come to me like, I have ADHD, but like, if you go deep down, it's like, well, there could be some ADHD, but there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of anxiety, right? So then for me, it's like you have to diagnose well and accurately to treat
Mhm.
well with medications. And like primary care providers, they have 10-15 minute visits. So it's like when patient says, I have ADHD, it's like, okay, let's start you on stimulant, but it's like really if you dig deep, it might not be ADHD
Mhm.
and we might be prescribing stimulants when it should not be there.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like two ends. It's like medication wise, if you try 2 or 3 and it's not getting better, yeah, you need to go see a psychiatrist. Like that's a dead giveaway. But if you're like, I feel like I need a little bit more time and attention to get the diagnosis right. Like I feel like something else is going on. If there's a hunch there, then I think you should go to a
Mhm.
psychiatrist and really be able to dig deep. And I'll say this too, is that because of the, healthcare quality of healthcare crisis, right? Um, Psychiatrists are best trained to get to the bottom of the diagnosis. But I
Mhm.
think given how healthcare is set up, I don't know if that provider's forte or I don't know, it could be in their blind side to like ask more questions, right? So I also like to advocate for patients like if you think something else is going on, um, write like a bullet point, like, hey, these are the symptoms and these are the timelines that I had. Like, what do you think? So that psychiatrist will be like, oh, I didn't know that, like, let me ask more about
Yeah.
that. So, um, being, I know it's hard to like talk back to your doctor, but like being confident that you know your story and
Mhm.
how to present it right so that you're maximizing your
Yeah.
encounter with your psychiatrist.
Yeah, that's good advice. Like, I often will have somebody, like, let's say we've been doing therapy for a while, and so I know them really well. I know their symptoms, I know how it's like affecting their life because I spend an hour with them every week versus like their primary care doctor might see them, like you said, 15 minutes every 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sometimes they'll say like I know I need to take this step and going to take to see a psychiatrist, but what do you say? Like the whole idea of like a psychiatrist or a shrink, like it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
scary, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so sometimes what I'll do is we'll spend some time in session just writing down, like, let's just make a list of all of the symptoms and the things that you've dealt with. And let's make a list of the things that you've tried in the past that has helped you or had not helped you, and
Yeah.
any medications that you've already tried, and how it's impacting you. And, like you said, timelines, things like that. And so we'll come up with this whole kind of like a bullet point list so that my client can go in really confident into the psychiatrist's office. And
Yeah.
As long as they're like a nice person that wants to actually listen. Because once in a
Yeah.
while you'll get somebody who's like, I don't care about your list. This is what
Yeah,
you're taking,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. But usually it will make my client feel a lot more like prepared to have the conversation because they feel like, I don't know what psychiatrists do. I don't know what I'm supposed to talk about. And it
Yeah.
seems scary to them.
Yeah. It could be scary too. And it's like whenever a guy go to my doctor and it's like my weight goes up or something, I'm like scared too.
Yeah.
So like a psychiatrist have doctor, what is it, white coat syndrome,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, and just to mention too about psychologists. So, like you said, a psychologist is a PhD level, has had several years post-college of training. One of the really cool things that psychologists are trained to do is like assessments, so
hmm
testing. So, a lot of the psychologists that I know, at least in our area, don't actually do that much therapy. They do a lot of testing.
that's true. Yep.
And so they're able to see like, does your kid have ADHD or does your kid have autism? Or I mean, I'm saying kid, but it could be adults too. Or like,
Yep.
are you gifted? Or are like they have a whole battery of tests that they can do to kind of help with that diagnosis as well. And so if you've
Yeah,
seen a psychologist, then you have a little bit more information to take back to either your therapist or your psychiatrist or something like that. And then sometimes the
absolutely.
psychologist also does the therapy.
Yeah. And it's called neuropsychological test, right? And
Mhm.
psychiatrists cannot, and some do, but that's not our forte of our
Mhm.
training. And it's really helpful when I'm digging deep with my kids or adults and there's like, dude, like my sessions are pretty long in the standards of like quality care right now. So like intakes at about an hour or hour and a half and follow-ups are 20 minutes, right? And that's pretty gold standard of like, and some psychiatrists go more, some psychiatrists goes less. But it's like there's some kids that I'm like, oh man, is this an IQ issue? Or is it autism issue? Is it ADHD issue? There's like really hard to tease apart. And that's when I would recommend neuropsychological tests too, because that would test IQ, reading comprehension, like math comprehension and,
Mhm.
executive function. So like those tests are really, really helpful for me to really get another level deeper so that I'm kind
Mhm.
of knowing like how to handle all these issues that the kid is having.
Mhm. Yeah. Just as an example, my husband had a traumatic brain injury, which is now like 25 years ago. But we didn't know when we were like young and dumb in our early 20s, like
Inexperience, yeah.
what would be the impact of a traumatic brain injury 25 years down the road, right?
Yeah.
And so just recently we had him in for a neuropsych evaluation and they did the whole, I mean, it's hours of testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
they found out some really interesting things. Like
Mm.
I didn't know they could have you like smell something, and if you can identify the smell, then they
Right.
say, "Oh, that nerve in your brain is good." And if you
Yeah.
can't, then
Yeah.
oh, it shows brain damage in that area. Like that I mean, that was really brief and not the greatest explanation, but there was some really
Yeah.
cool things that we found out about his brain based on the testing, and it's not invasive. It's just, you're verbally doing the testing with the
Yeah. It definitely can collect a lot of knowledge and we say neuropsychological testing is definitely a gold standard of what we have. It's not perfect
Mhm.
and there's a human error, right? Because humans are conducting those tests. So there's
Right.
definitely, spectrum of quality of neuropsychological testing, and there's aspects of human error. But brain is so fascinating, and like what we know about brain now is like nowhere close to what we thought brain did like in 20, 30 years ago. So
Mhm.
my forte, even as a psychiatrist, like I'm supposed to be the expert of the brain, but there's two aspects. There's like neurological and
Mhm.
there's like more emotional, spiritual, and I would say my limitation is that I can't be like the best at both,
Right.
and because like the whole the SSRIs, like so serotonin brain, like, oh, more serotonin, you're happier you are, and that's how like Prozac and Zoloft sold, the pharmaceutical companies like sold SSRIs. And in my clinic practice, like we know that it works, but that serotonin, theory is
Mhm.
getting like debunked, right? So that's not how brain works. So it's like
Mhm.
brain is so complex, and I'm so glad that there's professionals who are constantly revising and restudying the brain,
Yeah. Yeah.
because what we know today could be completely debunked, in 10,
Mhm.
15. Which kind of leads me to like my point is like I think spiritual care, it's once you kind of get it, it doesn't get changed that much,
Mm.
because spiritual needs, wants, and fears,
Mhm.
of like wanting belonging and wanting to be heard and seen,
Yeah.
once you can like learn that art, I've found that there's no way that this is going to get debunked. You know what I mean?
That's
It's
a
a
good
human
point.
experience, right?
Yeah. So like you said, we have like our gold standard of scientific medical care right now, but it's for 2024, like whatever
Yeah,
is the research for right now.
right.
Whereas the standard of care that Jesus gives his people
Mm,
hasn't changed for thousands of years, right?
mm-mm,
Like it
mm-mm.
stays the same.
Yeah.
We might have
And
different cultural trends, but we still have the same Jesus.
absolutely. And it's like, and then in my episode, we talked about church hurts, right? And it's
Hmm.
like really when people try to institutionalize Jesus, or like make it marketing, or like strategize Jesus, like so many things got lost,
Hmm.
into portraying Jesus as a task. But in those dark moments in our lives, right, like we tap into that, the art of Jesus, the
Hmm.
spirit of Jesus, that experience of Jesus, it's like I feel like that is just not is felt, and is I think it's just should be discussed more,
Yeah.
and especially in our line of work, and especially in human experience. um and I just wanted to really bring that forward whenever I'm talking to my patients. And to when you say like, oh, people are scared to talk to a psychiatrist, and I would be too, but what was so profound is I think I'm channeling Jesus when I'm asking about their childhood,
Mm.
because nobody thought about their childhood. But I'm like, there's so many important events and details there. And I feel like that was a parenting that they never received. And me as a psychiatrist saying, like, how did you feel when that happened? Like,
Mhm.
and then like empathize and stay with them.
Mhm.
They're they're like always they come to me like I feel so seen and validated and heard, because they didn't think that their childhood was important. But I'm like trained to go there and be like, wow, that affected you now, and they're
Yeah.
like making that connection with themselves.
Mm. I don't want you to have to break confidentiality or anything like that with your patients, but do you have any like examples of times when you've been able to integrate your faith in Jesus into your treatment plan?
So I would say two ways, right? Everybody who comes in shouldn't and don't have the expectation that I'll be like bringing up Bible verses or something like that. So
Yeah.
there's that indirect care, that I'm trying to see them as a whole person,
Hmm.
as Jesus did. And there are times that um a lot of times people come into my clinic in crisis, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
nobody seeks out a psychiatrist if they're doing well. Like it's always in a crisis, or something's missing, or something is painful. And but at the same time they don't want to stay like this. And it's
Right.
like I really commend them, like you took a giant leap of faith today to be
Hmm.
here, and I don't take that lightly. um and there's a big part of regret, because especially when I'm talking to adults, they've done some things because of their pain,
Hmm.
and they just don't know how to handle it. And when I'm linking their childhood, I'm like, this one particular person, and there's a patterns of this, right? There are smart kids, right?
Hmm.
but neglected, didn't get attended. So they're using their smarts to figure out how they're going to survive and thrive in this world, got in the wrong crowd, did some things, and now they're like, now what? But the fact that I recognize you're a really smart kid, and they're like, you're right, I was, so just, Jesus is like, you saw them for who they are,
Mm.
and the gifts that they have, and I do really share Jesus's love with them in that attentive way. There's some very direct way. This one patient that I had was, he was pathological liar and had a lot of trauma and was an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic at that time. And he hated church. He hated God and what he represented. Did a lot of running away, right? And but he knows that I'm Christian and we dabble. He asked me questions and blah blah blah. But one time he was like really openly sharing with his guilt and shame for all the lies that he's told, all the hurts, right? And I just kind of said, I don't know if you know, but let's just take father of faith Abraham, for example. Did you know that he basically, quote unquote, sold his wife to Pharaoh or like foreign country twice and said, let's just pretend that you're my sister and not my wife because they're going to kill me. And I was like, if my husband did that to me, I'll be like, what? Like you are so messed up. And then I told those details about Abraham, and I'm like, but he's still, deemed as a father of faith. So a lot of times, Bible stories of perfect God, but really flawed, imperfect people. And I kind of gave that nugget to him, and then he was like, I never knew that Abraham did that. And I'm like, dude, and like my pastor says this too, is like Bible sometimes has a juicier stories than any tabloids that you can imagine
Yeah.
because they don't leave it like hanging or like hidden. It's like, and I love that about the Bible. So I gave that nugget to him, and then he's like, oh my gosh, like let me just read into this story of how imperfect Abraham was. And then so those are like direct moments where I'm just like, like Bible characters are so flawed, like you have no idea. And that gives people hope. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one who was like basically cheating on my wife or cheating on my spouse. Like Abraham did that too. So those are some of the ways that I do incorporate my inner child to give people hope and
Mm.
attention.
Well, I know you mentioned to me before, I think it was when we were recording for your podcast, that you have the spiritual gift of wisdom, which
Mm-hmm.
you can describe a little bit of how you define that, but also, like, how do you think that benefits you as a mental health provider?
Yeah, and that's something that um I grew up thinking that if you were proud of what you had or what you're gifted with, that was like pride, right?
Mm.
Like that was the mantra, like, oh, don't boast of things. And I read this book, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. It was like Wishing of You by Joe Saxton. And she
Mm.
really did a great job going to biblical characters, going to their story, which really inspired me to share how I view the Bible characters, like with a child's psychiatrist lens, right? So she really gave me the insight of doing narrative deep dive case study on Bible characters. And I was like, wow, like that's how I read the Bible too. And like that was a thing.
Mm.
And second, she really tapped into, I know that she's not a mental health provider, but she's so wise in that what were some of the gifts that was like pushed down and shoved down and got labeled as such, and it just never had the time to
Yeah.
really be fruitful and blossom. And it led me to this like one remote memory that I had. Mind you, I was like an immigrant, came from 10 with like no English background. And when I was like 17, like right after I got saved, my mega Southern Baptist church had like a youth weekend where, high school kids can preach.
Mm.
And I don't even know why I signed up with my English, like 6 years of English debt or 6, 7 years of English then. I just like signed up. And maybe it was my cutthroat, high achieving person that just like did that. And then what, and it's not a like clear memory, but what ended up happening was as I was getting trained with the youth minister, I ended up speaking in like all three services at this mega church. And these are
Mm,
like thousands of people. But I felt so free, like when
mm,
I was on stage, like I was not insecure. Like I actually felt more authentic to myself when I was preaching.
yeah.
And then so I remember that, but then at the end of the third service or something, like this grandma came up to me and was like, "You had the best sermon out of everyone." And
Mm,
she said that to me. And like as a high school person, I'm just like, "Oh, sure, thank you, thank you, thank you." Like I just like let it that. But when I read that book at Joe Saxton's book, I remembered that. And I was like, God, what was that about?
mhm,
And it made me think about, okay, what am I gifted with? So then it kind of led me to journey of like identifying I love public speaking,
mm,
I love teaching, and wisdom is interesting too. And that made me think when I was growing up, all my friends came to me with their problems
mhm.
and I would like have like a aphorism or like idiom that I just spit out. And my
Yeah.
friends called it Eugenisms.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, like that makes so much sense. So that was always a thing. And I just didn't know what it was. And that book was like, oh my gosh, I think it's a gift of wisdom
To
that
identify.
I can give perspective in a very concise way.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So now, as in your profession
Uh-huh.
with your MD and like all of that, like you're able to use the spiritual gift that's in you to be able to like see what's happening, right? And to
Yeah.
be able to wrap that up with like, here's your step forward, or here's the thing you
Mm.
need to know to be able to move forward into healing, right?
Yeah, it's like a magic and like just to know that audience has no doubt like it's not me. And it's like um some and I love efficiency and what I love about wisdom is that it's so efficient in
Mm-hmm.
teaching like what I'm thinking in my head. And what has been really cool is like gift aside, right? Because I don't want the listeners to be like, well, I don't have a gift of wisdom, like screw this, right? Each of us have a gift, and it's like connecting that ability, presence of gift, and ability to use that gift as your inner child gets healed and raised up by God. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
a process of God encouraging you. Wow, you did that really well. Like, do you want to do more of it? That kind of fatherly voice encouraging our inner child to really own up to what he has already given us, right? So now is really effortless how I incorporate everything that I learned and gained and received, because how I like to do that is little Eugene inside, like using her gift and her presence to touch other inner children. Like that's how I like see it in my office. It's like um little Eugene's like, oh, like she's like talking to me like in my head is like, like they said that, like what is that about? And like kind of chasing after that, um like the other person, his mortgage is getting paid by this like rich retired parents, right? And then he was like, well, if I screw this up and like relapse again, they're gonna stop paying. If I don't meet their expectations, they're gonna stop paying mortgage and I'm another failure. And little Eugene caught that, like he said expectations.
Mm-hmm.
How can we free him from that word? That And then I can kind of channel it around and say, you said your parents' expectations, but what if you expected that for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't you kind of want sober, independent living for
Yeah,
yourself?
yeah.
And then he's like, you're right. Like, I do want that. So it's like little Eugene can capture little moments here and there. And like, okay, like, tell me more about why you use the word that, and
Mhm.
it's just really cool, like, cool experience for me to be more of myself too with my
Yeah.
gifts.
Yeah. Well, I want to do like a whole series on how like professionals are using their like innate
Oh, that would be
gifts, their
so
spiritual
awesome.
gifts in their
Yes.
profession. Okay, we'll save that for another podcast.
Yeah.
That's so
Well, I
cool.
can I can speak on that because so now I'm launching a public speaking gig, which I'm not equipped to do, right? Public speaking online course, I'm is being done, but I told God, I was like, God, I can't do that. Like, I need a team because I'm not equipped with those things,
Mm.
like, and that's a whole nother field that is really gig based, and I don't even know how to market myself as a public speaker. So then I was like praying about that. And now God is putting me people around me who's so gifted at different things that I'm not gifted at. And like, it's amazing what is so easy for them that is like, I would have taken hours and years to
Yeah.
own that, and it's just like, and we talked about in our episodes, like beauty of church, and it's like, church is such a beautiful idea of like diverse talents and spiritual
Mm.
gifts
Yeah.
with sets of weaknesses because of our strength and, gifts and stuff, just like helping each other out with a common mission. And I've just been kind of really impressed at the diversity of God's gift that he gifted us,
Mm.
and just like, wow, like, it's just amazing how beautiful and diverse God's children are, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, that inspires me. I like have all these thoughts going in different directions. So
Yeah, yeah,
just I hope that we get to have another conversation that as we both
absolutely.
kind of develop our thinking and our gifts around this area. I love being connected to you. So can you tell our listeners just like how they can find out more about you and your practice and your podcast and maybe the new thing that you're doing as well?
Yeah. Depending on when this podcast episode is getting launched, is gonna be happening around the spring of 2025.
Okay.
And let me just kind of backtrack. So my psychiatry practice called Restore Psychiatry, MD PLLC, and is, sorry, but limited to realms of Texas,
Texas,
boundaries of
right?
Texas.
Yeah.
Um, you can technically fly to Texas if you want to see me
That's true.
and
Yeah.
be seen that, yeah. So it's in Texas, and I have a good news mental health podcast that just got rebranded with the conviction that I really wanted to focus on Christian faith and mental health.
Mm.
Um, and the newest thing that I'm kind of developing is how to create an online course that will make everybody with a cognitive triad. We talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
Hmm.
Like, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are all linked. But
Hmm.
what if I can teach them what I know, how to regulate your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and be really in tune with yourself so that we're no longer reacting out
Mm.
of insecurity or fragile mind, and how to run that engine so smoothly and efficiently so
Mm.
that you're making the decision in your life that suits you and is fair to you, but also fair to other people. So that's the first online course that will be launching. I do want to kind of explore the idea of God, human, parent child relationship,
Mm.
how to reconcile. So online courses will be coming, but it's just I love efficiency, I love wisdom, so I wanted to make it so dense and efficient so that people can listen to me for like 2 to 3 hours and do some exercise and be like, oh, I'm getting the hang of this, like,
Yeah.
I think I can do that. That's my contribution to end the mental health crisis.
Okay. Good
But that's
work.
in the works. Yeah, that's in the works, but it's
Okay.
2025, so I'm like super excited about it.
And will that be over at your practice website or you have another place people can look for that?
So that will be another website. It will be under www.uejinkim.com,
Okay.
and you can kind of find the course there, but I'll definitely give you the descriptions in the description box so that people will know.
Okay.
But if you want to stay up to date, you can join the email list.
Mm.
Email newsletter will have most up to date. So when it's out, you'll be the first person to know. So that would be my recommendation.
Great. Okay, so everybody look in the show notes because I'm going to provide all the links for that so you can know how to spell things and know how to find what you need to find. So before I let you go, Eugene, what are you doing for soul care?
That's something, it's like, it's a journey in itself, right? But one thing that I'm really practicing is just like mental healthcare is not just like a pedicure day,
Mm.
it's like soul care is not just do things day, like I think I'm paying more attention to myself
Mm.
and attention to my inner child.
Mm.
And sometimes my prayers are more childlike in a way. Like if I'm feeling down or sad or hurt or tired or, confused, I just kind of talk to God as a child and encouraging my spirit to do that. So um I do say things like, God, I'm feeling really down, or I feel really small,
Mm.
like, can you just give me a way to cheer me up? And I'll just kind of wait.
Mm.
um and some of the reflection points, or maybe a song that
Yeah.
I'm listening to just like touches me a certain way, and that that little rhythm of asking and waiting and receiving and asking, waiting and
Mhm.
receiving, just interacting with God, that's been really awesome because
Mhm.
I'm not faking it, or I'm not putting words in God's mouth. I'm just
Right.
waiting,
Right.
so I think that's how I am trying to care for myself.
Yeah. I like that because you are becoming childlike, dependent
Mm-hmm.
on God. And you're also forcing yourself to slow down
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
I imagine that you, like me, are, you're a busy professional, you have kids, you have, a lot of responsibilities. And so slowing yourself down, slowing your mind down to wait on the
Mm-hmm.
Lord is a big step.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult step. And we can definitely talk more about that, but it's like, um, God is not expecting you to fix this world
Mm.
or be perfect.
Yeah.
And if that is sitting and marinating and being true in my heart, then I don't have to do a thing.
Mm.
Um, and that rush is gone, but now my feelings remain, and I'm
Mhm.
still hurt, or I'm still stressed, or I'm still
Mhm.
confused. And I'm like, God, help me with this.
Yeah.
And he's like, absolutely, and he would love to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those words. Everybody, I want to thank you for listening to the Soul Grit podcast today. And you can look for in the show notes for the links so you can find more about Dr. Uejin Kim. And I just want to thank you for being here today and having this wonderful conversation with me.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.